There are some mysteries where the answer is so shocking you wish you didn't know the truth, and that's going to be especially true. In this case of a teenager who disappeared in Augusta, Georgia, I'm afraid that in this one, the truth behind what happened is truly horrifying.
Really? He married to all this prettiness and he gonna run away with our daughter? Come on now. That's stupid.
So hold on tight. LaTonya Janelle Carwell, usually well known as Janelle, was a teenager with a bright future ahead of her. She was an honors student at T.W. Josie Comprehensive High School and won lots of achievement awards. Her pastor described her like this:
Janelle was a loving, very intelligent, smart young woman who wanted to be a doctor, who was an honors student.
Basically, she had an awful lot going for her, which makes what happens to her next seem even more insane. She lived in Richmond County, Augusta, Georgia, with her family. This was her little sister, her mom, Tanya Tripp, and her stepfather, Lean Tripp. Now, the night of April 17th, 2017, was her 16th birthday, and also Easter Sunday. She had a pretty big day. After they had enjoyed a cookout party at their home with friends and neighbors, her mom went to bed early and left Janelle and Leon to finish celebrating. At least this is what Janelle's mom told the police had happened on that night. Tanya went to bed and was woken by Leon at about midnight. He asked if he could borrow her phone to look up something. A friend of his, Maurice, needed a lift because his car had broken down. Not thinking anything of it, she gave Leon her phone. But because he wasn't great at using the map on the phone, he wanted Janelle to go with him, to help him with the directions to Clarksville, South Carolina. Now that's kind of a weird thing to take a kid to do that at that time of night, right? And Leon took Tanya's phone with him because apparently he didn't have access to the directions. Like, okay, maybe it wasn't a smartphone, or he didn't know about an app store. Well, it all sounds pretty strange to me. Anyway, things quickly became worse. Tanya didn't hear from Leon or her daughter again for the whole next day. Neither of them had returned from their late-night mission, and their phones weren't ever answered again. So Janelle's mom made a panicked call to the police to report that they were missing. This is the 911 call she made.
Been calling and texting and leaving messages and nothing.
Don't you think she sounds totally scared here and that the worst might have happened to them? Tanya was so sure that if they'd seen her phone calls, they would have picked up. So of course, this huge search started for them both. The cops and especially the local community got really involved. Everybody wanted to find the missing teenager. The frantic search carried on for the next 2 weeks. A local pastor who had a radio show got involved with raising awareness about the case, and Janelle's mom appeared on Facebook live streaming event. She told watchers that she had brain and lung cancer. That makes all of this even sadder, right?
I need my baby home. Like 15 days ago type home, because she has never been away from me this long.
Now on the Facebook post, they were trying to raise money for a reward, and by June the amount was over $2,500. But the community was also terrified that there was some kind of predator around threatening their lives. The publicity around Janelle was hard to miss, and I think people were pretty freaked out. But by late April 2017, law enforcement had finally found Leon's car. His white pickup truck was spotted about a mile from their home. The cops searched it for any signs of a struggle or DNA that could prove the worst, but nothing turned up there. I guess that's a good thing, but really frustrating. So the cops checked their cell phone records. What they found suggested Janelle and Leon hadn't been anywhere near the Clark's Well area, where the friend had apparently broken down. And even worse, Janelle's social media channels had gone completely silent. For a popular teenager like her to switch off? Yeah, this fact made the cops and everyone who cared for her super worried. A charity called Bring Our Missing Home, which helps people to find their missing loved ones, was closely involved with the case at this point. They were really concerned that, despite all the coverage about Janelle's disappearance and the millions of flyers that had been spread all over Georgia, there hadn't been a single phone call or message with a sighting of Janelle. But eventually the police did hear something important about the case, only it really wasn't what they were expecting to find. Reports had finally started coming in about a sighting, and guess who it was? It was Leon Tripp. He'd been seen all on his own, somewhere in Atlanta. But sadly, there was no sign of Janelle with him. The police realized they had to dig into Leon's past. They didn't have to look very far because it turned out he had a super dark criminal history.
He had some assault charges, he had some cruelty to children charges.
He'd even been in jail for aggravated assault. And Janelle's mom knew all about this. In fact, they'd both gone to high school together, And after Leon was put away for a few years, they'd somehow grown even closer, exchanging letters and phone calls. Very romantic. Leon and Tanya had even married while he was still locked up. But it seems like Janelle's mom really didn't mind any of his super sketchy past. Once he was released, as I mentioned earlier, he'd moved into the same house with her and her 2 daughters. This was in 2015, 2 years before Janelle vanished with him. I mean, that background is totally not a great look for Tanya or Leon. And this time the cops were after him for abduction charges. They were pretty sure he'd done something to his stepdaughter. But Janelle's mom really didn't want to believe this. One reporter even noticed how little she wanted to hear it.
Hey, investigators believe that he's taken her. She was very defensive.
And the lady who ran Bring Our Missing Home, Kathy Rhodes, agrees that Tanya's actions were getting sketchier. Kathy had worked really close to Tanya the whole time they were trying to find Janelle. She couldn't help noticing that the number of red flags kept increasing. Too much just didn't add up. Following the suspicion that Leon might have abducted her daughter, Tanya had said in one interview,
Really? He married to all this prettiness and he gonna run away with our daughter? Come on now. That's stupid.
It's definitely kind of an odd thing to say, isn't it? By now, the people who were working on the case and were in close touch with Tanya, they were starting to really get anxious about her motives. And the signs of Tanya's possible jealousy of her daughter really didn't stop there. By this point, Tanya was even accusing law enforcement of only coming after her and not doing enough to find her daughter. But the police had finally tracked him down. A call came through that Leon had been discovered. He was at a U-Haul depot in Atlanta. This should be good news, right? But guess who is right there with him? Well, you're not going to believe it. Or maybe you will. When the cops arrived at the U-Haul to arrest Leon, Tanya Tripp was right there with him. That's pretty hard evidence that something was messed up about the whole situation. What were they both hiding about Janelle? The cops were now absolutely sure that Tanya had known much more about her daughter's disappearance the entire time. But she insisted she'd only seen Leon by complete accident. Tanya claimed that she was being evicted and had begun to move to Atlanta. Then she spotted Leon walking along the road while she was driving the U-Haul back to the depot, and that's why they were together. Totally believable, right? Tanya really tried to sell that story, but yeah, that's all about as such as it sounds. Nobody was buying it. I mean, seeing him out there by accident has got to be a 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot. It's totally unlikely, and the cops thought so too. They immediately charged Leon with abduction, and Tanya was hit with hindering the apprehension of a criminal. Tanya called a neighbor from jail to let her know. The neighbor said,
"Are you serious?" And she said yes.
It was starting to dawn on everyone just how much they'd been lied to, given how hard the community worked to find Janelle. This must have hurt so much. And this began to crack the story that Tanya had been telling into lots of totally inconsistent pieces. Once Tanya was arrested, she kept telling the cops slightly different versions of her story, and Leon told a totally different story to that. Leon insisted that he and Janelle were going to Atlanta all along. Investigator Richard Roundtree reported that Leon claims, obviously this wasn't true, and she never made it. But when confronted, Tanya suddenly stopped answering further questions, and the cops couldn't get her to respond to any details of this other story, perhaps because it wasn't rehearsed with Leon. The cops also closely examined that 911 call Tanya had made. They soon figured out it was all a massive lie, and figured she had used it to send the search teams in the completely wrong direction. This would have bought Leon a lot more time to do whatever the heck he was doing. Oh, and Janelle's mom and I used that term pretty loosely at this point. Totally didn't have cancer, of any kind either. She lied about all of that too, which is the least sick thing going on here. Remember how much Tanya wanted her daughter back? This video is just 11 days after Janelle went missing.
I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I'm just worried about my family.
Even if she did care, she couldn't have been very interested in justice for her daughter. It was just as shocking because you don't expect someone's mom to cover up for anyone who would hurt them. But looking back at Tanya's behavior now, yeah, every single thing she did was just a huge lie. It was all a big act to cover up something terrible that she knew. So both parents were arrested and charged. Leon had also submitted a statement saying that Janelle was no longer living. All the cops could do now was carry on looking for poor Janelle's remains, but they still don't know where she was. And don't forget that Janelle had a little sister. I can't imagine how she was coping with all of this, and as far as I know, she's still with an aunt, where I hope she's in much safer hands. And then almost 1 year after Janelle had vanished on the Easter weekend, the cops released a very sad statement.
Received a phone call from a citizen and had discovered what they believed to be human remains.
This came from a person in Augusta, not all that far from where Janelle lived. They'd found something suspicious and upsetting in the garden of the house they were about to rent. And, naturally, they called the police. The area was searched and the sad truth was confirmed. Investigators confirmed that this was what remained of Janelle. She was identified by some dental records taken just before her birthday. And finally, Leon and Tanya were fully charged for the horrible things they'd done. They've both been charged for involvement and in concealment of whatever happened to Janelle. In fact, the reason why they did something so disgusting still isn't clear. And as you can imagine, the local community is totally cut up about being gritted by Tanya for so long. They can't believe they fell for it.
She's a liar. In my opinion, she told a whole lot of lies.
And people had worked so hard they even got sick trying to find her. Community leader Ray Montana had told the reporters about this.
Days and days of 100-degree sweat. Many people fell out. A couple of our search team, they went to the hospital. One young lady had to get a spinal tap because of the heat and everything. So it was definitely emotional. It caused a lot of depression in a lot of our lives because it affected the community. Janelle was like one of our own kids.
That's awful, and the details just get worse and worse. In 2018, some awful new evidence was added to the trial. It said that Tanya and Leon had had several meetings with a fixer to arrange a hit on Janelle, and they'd been planning to do it for at least 2 years. That's so cold and revolting, isn't it? What kind of mother even does that? This case just keeps on getting worse. Janelle never had a chance to really grow up. The only people who really seem to care about Janelle, apart from her poor sister, are the people who never even knew her. I think it's because what happened to her was so terrible, especially because she had so much to offer that lots of people felt very close to her.
Perhaps they did solicit someone, but the fact still remains that everything's pointing at them. And I hope that they die by the hands of the state.
Janelle's school held a vigil at the house where she was finally found. And people that didn't even know her were at the vigil, which they held to give the community some closure. And there are some efforts to make Janelle's passing count for something more. The district attorney arranged for new cat over dogs for each county. This pauper is called Dora, but they wanted to get Janelle's name in there somewhere. In 2019, 3 Jose High School seniors won $500 each from the Latina Janelle Carr Wells Scholarship Award. This comes from the reward money collected while she was missing. As for Janelle's so-called parents, Leon is facing the death penalty, and Tanya Tripp is charged with murder in the 2nd degree. But the dates of a full hearing kept getting pushed back, so we'll see what eventually happens to both of them. But I really hope that poor Janelle receives some justice, because she could have really been something amazing, and she was always amazing to begin with. So, what do you guys make of this case? How on earth could a mom do that to her own daughter? And why did they even do that to her at all? Let us know what you think down in the comments section below.